Every night, the elf Seidlin had to drink milk before going to bed.
The proteins in milk help you sleep better at night.
Excuse me, the shine from your hair is hitting me in the eye.
The shine from your hair is hitting me in the eye.
Once a month, a scary witch haunts the town of Kent. Until one day, she started drinking milk.
The calcium in milk reduces the symptoms of premenstrual syndrome.
Wow. Is there anything milk can't do?
Bar Black Sheep will have to look to his laurels, for in the world of wool he isn't the big noise he used to be. An Italian inventor has discovered how to get wool from milk. At the moment it's just plain, unadulterated cow juice, but you ain't seen nothing yet.
Apparently not. A newsreel from 1930s Britain there, and before that, a taste of the iconic Got Milk campaign, which has been running since the 1990s in the US, funded by the dairy industry. For decades, in much of the West, governments and industry haven't been shy in their attempts to get people to get milk. But not everyone's lapping it up. I'm Emily Thomas, and on the food chain this week, I'm asking whether the human race is on its way to abandoning its millennia-old habit of drinking from the udder of another species. Of course, not everyone does it. Around 70% of us are estimated to be lactose intolerant, with high levels reported in nearly all populations but those of Northern European origin. But in many countries where cow's milk has long been a staple part of the diet, such as the UK and the US, alternative products such as almond and oat milk are growing in popularity. Their promotional material's quite interesting too.
Wow! Wow! No cow!
I'm not sure how much this song had to do with it, but global retail sales of plant-based milks have increased by around 7% each year over the past 10 years, according to market research company Euromonitor.
No, wow!
And as we've been guzzling down all that oat and coconut, soy and almond, sales of good old cow's milk have increased by just under 1% annually. That's less than the rate of global population growth. The small increase is due to expansion in developing markets. In much of the West, we're drinking less cow's milk.
I got the milk 'em in the morning, feed 'em, milk 'em in the evening blue.
In the US, for example, according to its Department of Agriculture, people are on average drinking around 82 litres of cow's milk per year, down from around 136 in the 1970s. Research suggests that's largely due to beliefs that it's better for their health and the environment to cut down.
I got the milk 'em in the morning, feed 'em, milk 'em in the evening blues. This old wall-eyed Jersey ain't worth the cost.
In this episode, we want to explore whether this is just a blip in our long milk drinking history or a steady drip towards a cow's milk-free future. Is the decline in consumer demand in the West likely to continue, even accelerate? And if so, is this something we could then see happening in other parts of the globe too? At some point in the foreseeable future, could our dairy cows be out of a job?
I don't know why I don't sell you, except look at the money I'd lose.
And what would that do to the environment, global poverty, and our health? Here to answer those questions, I'm joined by Thorsten Hemmer, an agricultural economist who's managing director of IFCN, an international dairy research centre based in Germany. Elisa Hamilton's an independent scholar and author of Got Milked, What You Don't Know About Dairy and the Truth About Calcium. And Tony Peterson, CEO of Oatly, an oat milk company based in Sweden, founded in the 1990s. His company talks about a post-milk generation, and you heard him singing Wow Wow No Cow on his YouTube channel earlier. Tony, let's start with you. Your company Oatly has developed a non-dairy oat milk. How hard has it been to persuade people to drink it?
Not very hard, actually. I think that people really understand the concept. The decline of consuming milk has been going on for a very, very long time, since the 70s. It's only that now it's accelerating, especially among the younger people. You can see concern that is based on the climate change that we're facing right now. And they are willing to change their habits, and they are affecting their mothers, the dads, and the family to do the same thing. So the concept is there, and people understand it. They get it. But also, we are a science-based company. We are born out of Swedish science, which means that we really don't care. Like, as a company, we don't care about trends. We care about what science tells us what is right in terms of health and environmental issues. And we are willing to take a position on this. So for some people, it might come out as aggressive, but we think it's just telling the truth.
Aggressive in what way? What things have you said or approaches have you taken that people have seen as aggressive?
Well, we don't think it is, but the dairy industry does. So, for instance, we had a slogan said, "It's like milk, but made for humans," which is like the very reason why this company started. You know, lactose intolerance was discovered in Sweden back in the 60s, and the founder of our company made his PhD with that professor. They just figured, you know, if the vast majority of the world population are allergic to milk, why don't we design something that is made for humans and at the same time better for the planet?
Alyssa, Tony says it's not difficult to get people to drink his oat milk, and the alternative milk sector is growing. But strong as their push may be to get us to embrace their product, the dairy industry in many parts of the world, and the US perhaps in particular, is pretty powerful too. Do you see anything changing?
Well, unfortunately, the USDA, the agricultural organization, they actually write the dietary guidelines, but they also, their mandate is to promote agricultural commodities. So in fact, the dietary guidelines came about during the Second World War when there wasn't enough milk to make processed products to send to the soldiers overseas. So the government came up with an idea of how to get North Americans to drink more milk. And one of them was to add it to school lunch programs. And of course, we begin to see this focus on consuming milk, 3 glasses of it a day. So there has been a tight connection between the dairy industry and government in North America. That's lessening, though, and also in Canada. This is actually the first year that industry has not been invited to the table to talk about the dietary guidelines going forward. And so, yes, I do see governments are starting to come around to having more of evidence-based guidelines rather than in the past where they were more guided by economics and the dairy lobby as it grew.
Torsten Hemmer, what do you make of all this? Do you see a cow's milk-free future?
Well, I'm thinking who will decide that, and it's the consumers. And at the moment, I think consumers decide on their culture, taste, knowledge, affordability. And it's interesting to see that more and more people are really excited about an alternative to drink normal milk and other milk. And I like to make one very strong statement. We have done such a study now, scanning literature, what is the impact of milk production on reducing poverty on this planet? Scanning 100 journal articles, and we identified there, dairy is improving in all of these studies, the nutrition status of the people, the economic status of the people, the education status of the people, and the health status of the people. Wow. Now we have evidence using dairy as a tool to fight poverty, which is for me the biggest challenge on this planet. And I would say probably it's good that people in Kenya produce more milk.
But what about the environmental side of all of this? If we did reduce dairy, wouldn't we see positive effects for the environment in terms of a reduction in methane emissions from cows?
2% of all global greenhouse gas emissions can be related to dairy. So if you take dairy out, put other crops in, which also create emissions, you might save 1% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Is it a lot? Not too much, and we don't save the planet with that one. On the other side, let's move to the social part here. We have analyzed how many dairy farms we have in the world, and we came up with around 120 million. And the average dairy farm in the world keeps 3 cows. And what we see, if we take dairy out of the diets people, we need to find new activities for 1 billion people or for 100 million farmers. And additionally, you have the whole value chain and people associated. We came up with a number that probably 1 billion people's livelihood is affected by producing and distributing milk. So we would have a tremendous social, tremendous economic challenge, and we lose a tremendous tool on fighting poverty in developing countries.
Tony, listening to Torsten there, he was talking about disrupting livelihoods and the sheer scale of the dairy industry. That's not something you want to disrupt, all those farmers' livelihoods, presumably.
Well, it's based on the system that we have today. I mean, milk isn't the sole solution of poverty in the world. It just isn't. And you can actually get farmers to grow something else, but they need support. I mean, it's a change that needs to be done. I think that the food supply system itself is one of the greatest challenges that we're facing. And it can't just be improved. We need to change it. We have to break it down and build it up again. And that takes a long time and a lot of resources to just change that. But it definitely can be done. I would really want to know what that study comes from, Torsten, when it says 2% carbon footprint. According to UN, scientists and researchers, university in the world, it is way higher than that. So I'm just wondering who did that study.
I can share this study with you. You have a study, Livestock Long Shadow, 18% was that number, which is 10 years old. And I have a FAO study, which was done some years ago by the same researchers, coming with a dairy-specific number, which is somehow a tenth of that. I don't disagree with basic research. I'm putting basic research on the table here.
But that's what makes this whole thing very difficult for consumers, when you have this information that is flying across, in media, and it's really hard for consumers.
Tony, can I ask you about your oat milk and the environmental impact of that? Have you got any feeling about how you would compare producing all those oats and the impact on the environment of that kind of agriculture to dairy agriculture?
Well, according to the LCAs that we have done, and which is also audited by third parties, we can see that the energy usage, for instance, is 60% lower. You can see the land usage is almost 80% lower, and we see the greenhouse gas emission is 80% lower. As a company, we go deep. We also have farming. We are engaged in farming projects of where the question is, can you make a sustainable farming? Is that even possible? But you also, talking about poverty, you can feed about 30% more using the same amount of land. I think that we're showing that you can actually change the system. But again, everything is linked. This is very difficult. You have to have a really long vision and horizon on this. Looking at oats purely, you can grow oats anywhere in the world, like in every continent, up in the Andes or in the desert of Mongolia. So, I mean, the preconditions, it exists to make this change, but it's going to take a very long time. And this will be a continuous discussion for decades, I think.
Alyssa, you've been listening to all that. What do you think the social and environmental impacts would be were we to abandon cow's milk?
Yes, I've been itching to jump in. The Obama administration back in 2014, as part of its climate action, singled out the dairy industry and said that it would be a key step to reduce the U.S. dairy sector's greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by 2020, and this is due to the methane emissions, of course. Also, I don't know about the 3 cow per farm worldwide average, but in the U.S., the farms that are growing are ones with 1,000 cows or more. So in order to feed Americans the amount of milk that we've been consuming, it's clearly unsustainable at this point.
Tell me, milk cow, what on earth is wrong with you?
We'll get back to our three guests in a moment, but first, a quick reminder that you're listening to The Food Chain on the BBC World Service with me, Emily Thomas. This week, we're asking whether the world is on a slow but steady path to ditching cow's milk. We've been hearing about the rise in alternative products and their social and environmental impact. But what about human health? Sophie Medlin is a lecturer in nutrition at King's College London. I'd like our three guests to hear her perspective.
Cow's milk is a great sort of complex of nutrients. It's a really useful thing to have in our diets, and it provides us with lots of important nutrients, including things like calcium, which is what's really famous for, but also vitamin D and things like iodine and magnesium, things that are sometimes a little bit more difficult to find in other areas of your diet. Things like B12 as well, which is really important. It's also a great source of complete proteins, so it gives you all of the amino acids that your body can't make on its own. And that's really, really helpful for lots of people. It's a great source of cheap nutrition.
Is there anything specifically about cow's milk we value as opposed to milk from other animals, or some of these alternatives, these nut milks, for example?
Plant-based milks don't contain the same type of calcium. The calcium that's in plant-based milks, we're not really sure how easy to absorb it is, so how beneficial it is for our bones. There's not really been any studies because it's artificially added into the milks. The proteins in plant-based milks are not the same as well, so they don't usually provide complete proteins. There's also some plant-based milks now that have just been released onto the market and they've not bothered to put calcium in them at all, which seems really irresponsible from a nutrition perspective. You also don't get the iodine, which is really important for fertility and thyroid function that cow's milk provides. And some of the big sort of authorities on osteoporosis, for example, are very worried about this move towards plant-based milks, particularly amongst teenage girls.
But you can find ways of getting that calcium that aren't through cow's milk.
Yeah, so plant-based calciums and calcium from other sources like sardines, fish with bones, for example, are just as effective. And in different countries, there are different primary sources of calcium. So, for example, in the Chinese population, people drink a lot of, have lots of stews and things like that with bones in them, and that will give them some calcium. And we get our mineral sources from different areas depending on the country that we live in, our sort of primary mineral sources. In this country, like many other countries, we're suffering from food poverty. So lots of people are relying on food banks or donated food to be able to access nutrition. And demonising a really good quality food staple is a very irresponsible thing to do, in my opinion. We're really making people feel they shouldn't be having this thing because there's got all these negative things associated with it, when actually there's no really robust evidence, and governments around the world are still recommending dairy as an important source of nutrition.
Tony, what did you make of that? Plant-based milks don't contain many of the nutrients that occur naturally in cow's milk unless they're fortified. So do you share some of Sophie's concerns?
Well, no, I don't. There are no evidence and no research around the fact that the body doesn't absorb enriched products. On the other hand, I can see at the studies where you can see osteoporosis at extremely high level among people that drink milk. Like in the Nordics, for instance, we have the highest level of osteoporosis here, even though we drink a lot of milk. And according to these studies, there are reasons for it. But obviously, you know, there are a lot of interests here, like huge commercial forces, and there's a lot of politics involved here. So, I mean, as a consumer, it's really, really confusing to understand what's right and wrong here. There's a lot of good research, independent research that's out there, and I just feel sorry that a majority of the consumers don't have access to it.
Alyssa, you heard Sophie Medlin, the nutritionist, there too. Isn't cow's milk a relatively cheap way of providing populations with very valuable nutrients?
This environmental question points out that it's not cheap. There are many externalities that have not been accounted for in the price of milk as it now stands. And the nutritionist also challenges plant-based milks being fortified with calcium and whether we can really assimilate those nutrients. But in fact, milk is fortified with vitamin D. And to use the word demonizing milk, I don't hear anybody demonizing milk. I hear Tony talking about balance, and it just makes sense to make milk an option rather than a requirement. And that's a move towards balance, a balanced approach towards our diet.
Torsten, we've been talking about the potential environmental and social effects of reducing cow's milk consumption, but gaze into your crystal ball for a moment. In 10 years' time, where do you think we'll be?
Based on our estimates, the consumption of dairy products is increasing in developed countries and developing countries substantially, partly replacing also vegetable fats with animal fats. That's the latest trend. Will we consume more milk? I would say definitely in all developing countries. Will we consume globally more dairy products? Probably 20% more in the next 10 years.
Tony, what do you think?
Well, if the consumption is increasing, it would be because the world population is increasing. But if you look at the ratio between non-dairy and dairy, my assumption is that non-dairy will be bigger than dairy products by then.
Is there data to support that?
Well, if you look at North America, if you look at Europe, if you look at on the global scale, I'm not sure, maybe it's going to be, I can't predict that. I just know that things are accelerating really fast now. And in those, what we call are like more the Western societies, we will see that happen. I mean, if you would have given every person in China a glass of milk, there's not enough cows in the world. There will never be enough to support that. So there will have to be something else. But I mean, Torsten is right. When people are suffering from malnutrition or don't have enough nutrition, milk has been the solution in many parts of the world. But in our society, in the Western society, and in most part of Asia, you know, that doesn't exist. We do have access to nutrition. You can get it elsewhere.
And Alyssa, will we see more people in general rejecting milk?
Certainly in North America, I see, yes, more recognition. I mean, you know, I don't think we realized 50, 100 years ago that collards, dried ground basil, 2 tablespoons has the same amount as a glass of milk. I mean, canned salmon, we mentioned, sesame seeds, tahini, tofu. So a lot of the foods that Asian countries and Middle Eastern countries eat a lot of are really high in all of the nutrients that or not necessarily all of them, but certainly the key ones that we focus on with milk, calcium being the king. Our nutrition knowledge has advanced so much that, yes, I do see a decline in our reliance on milk, certainly in North America.
There's some real differences of opinion here. What is a consumer to do? Torsten, it's not straightforward, is it?
Yeah, you know, I don't give you a science answer. I give you a human answer on that one. Do what you enjoy, do what you like to eat, and eat it. That's what I would recommend.
Tony, what do you think?
I would say rely on science, but make sure that the sources are right. Who made those studies? That's going to be important.
And Alyssa, what should the consumer do?
It's confusing to be told that we need to have 3 glasses of milk a day for strong bones and all our calcium. That's where the confusion lies, because that has masked all the other foods that are very nutritious, high in calcium, you know, a lot of nutritious foods that we have overlooked in relying on milk. So just inform yourself about where you can get your calcium and then decide how you would like to go forward with that information.
Alyssa, do you ever drink milk yourself?
Actually, I don't. I do really enjoy kefir. That's my favorite dairy product, but I just don't like milk. I actually don't even buy plant-based milk substitutes because I don't.
Tony will be disappointed to hear that.
Right.
Tony, do you drink milk?
I don't.
Do you drink oat milk, though? I hope you drink your own product.
Yes, I do. Cow's milk I don't, but I drink oat milk. And I'm also half Japanese, just so you know, have these Asian genes.
And Torsten, presumably you drink the stuff by the gallon?
No. And, you know, I drink all types of milk, including oat, wheat, rice. You know, my wife is a fan of, Tony, your products. And in our fridge, we have them all, right?
Say hi to her.
Yeah. But I think what's interesting, we are living not in the either-or world, we are living in the and world. There's fantastic opportunities with plant-based protein products, innovative solutions. Great. There is great dairy products, and let the consumer decide what they feel is good for them and what they enjoy, what makes them happy, and where they have a good feeling.
Okay, and that's all we have time for. Many thanks to my guests who, it turns out, have been multitasking.
Torsten, you sent me an email.
Yes, with the FO study.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah. How did you get me? How did you get my email? I was going to ask you about your email address. You're so smart. You're so smart.
I don't know why I don't sell you, except look at the money I'd lose.
Thanks to Tony Peterson, CEO of Oatly, Torsten Hemmer from the International Dairy Research Centre, IFCN, and author Alyssa Hamilton. And thanks for your comments over the past couple of weeks in response to our programmes on food and grief. A widower in South Africa told me he felt our episode was chillingly insightful. He said, "For the first time, I understood what had happened. Never knew that others went through the same horrors. For the first year, I never once used the stove." And a listener in Canada said, "Widowed 3 years ago, this brought up a lot of things that never occurred to me. Eating alone, not eating at the table much anymore, not making certain foods. Much to think about." And this from the US. "My lovely wife died 15 months ago, and I still have not been able to eat a proper meal. This helped." We were really glad to hear these episodes have struck a chord with you. Do let us know what you think about our programmes on social media using the hashtag BBC Food Chain, or I'm on Twitter at Emily Thomas BBC. From me and the rest of the team, Sarah Stollartz, Sarah Parry and Joshua Thorpe, thanks for your comments, thanks for listening, and join us again for the Food Chain next week.
I'm really gonna tell you some news. Even though I said you wouldn't give 9 squirts, bless your old heart, I love you so much it hurts. I got to milk 'em in the morning, feed 'em, milk 'em